amount of time, the Middle East will be mired in war. 2 wars to be specific, and both prophesied in great detail in the Bible. The first war, which some have labeled the Psalm 83 war, will set the stage for the war that will shortly follow, which is known as the War of Gog and Magog. Both of these wars will happen before tribulation begins. In this webcast we will focus on the first war, which in the words of the Iranian President Ahmadinejad, is likely to happen in spring or summer of this year. This first war will accomplish all the prerequisites for the War of Gog and Magog, which will shortly follow. We know that the War of Gog and Magog will be an alliance led by Iran and Russia, which at first doesn't seem to make much sense because this soon-coming preliminary war would seem to have Iran directly at the heart of it. It does and it doesn't. The best way to understand what is about to happen is to first understand that the War of Gog and Magog is really an extension of this soon-coming war with only a small gap of time between the two, much like World War II was an extension of World War I, only with a much larger gap of time between the two. We must also understand that Iran is only weeks or months away from having nuclear weapons, and while it is true that Israel must take action to stop Iran, the reverse is also true. If Iran doesn't want Israel to destroy their nuclear capability, Iran must act preemptively to keep Israel from stopping them. The caveat for Iran, though, is that they cannot afford, at least right now, to take direct action against Israel. If the Iranian regime does, they and all they have been working for will be destroyed, so what they are doing right now is executing Plan B, which is to fight a war by proxy.
Fox News contributor Michael Goodwin, you just got back. How many days were you there?
A short week.
Yeah. And what did you learn, bottom line?
Well, look, Greg, I think that Israel is very, very nervous across the political spectrum in Israel. This is not just the conservative government. This is all across the political spectrum in Israel. Really nervous about Iran. No question there that Iran is intending to get a nuclear weapon, and Israel simply cannot accept it. Israel sees it as an existential threat, right, that merely having the bomb, whether it intends to use it or not, would scare the bejesus out of many Israelis, and in fact that's what they're facing now. So there is a real concern that the United States is not going to do anything about it, and Israel may have to.
Well, and what caught my attention when I read your column, as I always do, you quoted a top Israeli political insider that if international efforts fail to stop Iran from enriching uranium, Israel will be forced to use not only conventional weapons to take out Iran's atomic sites, but tactical, nuclear weapons as
right,
well. How reliable was that source?
Well, very reliable, very knowledgeable, very well connected. That is the nightmare scenario. That's not something that anyone there hopes will happen or wants to happen. It is simply that Israel will do what it has to. And again, I stress that is the commonality among all the political parties now. There's absolutely, I could find no daylight between left and right on this issue, yeah, that Israel cannot accept it if Iran is going to get a nuclear weapon. And don't forget, that used to be the American policy. Now it's not clear. President Obama has spent a year engaging, as Hillary Clinton said in that clip, right, and yet nothing's happened. Deadlines come and go, and we just keep backpedaling. As you see again, as you said again today, Ahmadinejad has ordered further enrichment. They've been just playing games all along. They obviously have no intention of acceding to international demands, and so it does seem we're on a collision course. The only question is who's going to represent the West. Is it going to be America and the others, or is it going to be Israel alone?
You know, it was just 2 days ago Iran's foreign minister said, "Oh, we'll do a deal now. Right. It's all just about done. We're going to export to the West our uranium for enrichment, and then it'll come back in isotope form for medical research and peaceful purposes and so forth." And what did it take? 48 hours for Ahmadinejad to say, nah, there ain't a deal, and in fact we're going to start enriching up to 20%.
That's about the third time that game has been played, and you would think we'd get a little tired of it now, but they keep playing the game, and we're buying it less and less, but they keep buying themselves time. And I should say too, the other thing, Greg, that's going on there is all kinds of reports coming out of the Mideast that Iran is shipping missiles and ammunitions and people through Hezbollah, to Hamas, into Syria, through Lebanon. So you have all kinds of right, munitions being transferred back and forth, if any of these reports are true. And so it really is a sense that the war drums are beating throughout the Mideast, and Iran would love to get Israel in a war with somebody else so Iran could sort of not get hit itself. But Michael, I think that's what's going on.
It's clear the
Outside of Israel, Iran is the biggest player in the Middle East. In the West, we tend to think in terms of finances, therefore we would naturally think that outside of Israel, Saudi Arabia would be the next biggest player, but that's not the case. Iranian control over fanaticism throughout the Arab world, coupled with their nearly finished nuclear program, makes them the de facto leader of the Islamic world. Their successful defiance of the West only bolsters their position. Iran completely controls Hezbollah and the Palestinians. Syria, and only to a slightly lesser extent, Lebanon and Jordan are puppet regimes of Iran, while the rest, maybe not puppet regimes, certainly march to the Iranian drumbeats out of fear of them and hatred of Israel in the West. Ezekiel 38:10, in speaking of the war of Gog and Magog, tells us, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme." I believe this is happening right now. Iran is currently orchestrating a war in which they do not risk themselves directly, but rather they will use bordering nations of Israel to attack her. I believe Russia is heavily involved in the background for now, providing planning and war council expertise.
United Arab Emirates newspaper The National reports that the three-party meeting that took place in Damascus last week, gathering the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, was a war council to devise counterattack plans and assign tasks in the event of an Israeli offensive on one or all parties. So says Abdelbari Atwan, the editor-in-chief of the pan-Arab newspaper Al-Quds Al-Arabi. Atwan wrote, quote, "The timing of the meeting, the way it was undertaken, and the ensuing press conference that was held at its conclusion all point to a strategic coalition being reinforced. This is the buildup of a new front that will spearhead the confrontation with the U.S.-Israeli alliance and whichever Arab countries that may expressly or implicitly be affiliated with it." Iran's president says he expects war to break out somewhere between spring and summer of this year. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's chief vowed to strike the Israeli capital, its airports, and power stations if Israel dared to attack Beirut's critical infrastructure. Atwan said, quote, "Indeed, we are being exposed to a new discourse here, an unprecedented sense of self-confidence, and an unheard-of preparedness for retaliation." For its part, the Syrian leadership appears to have made up its mind to close off the U.S. administration's, quote, "trite and cheap flirtation with Damascus," and opted for bolstering its tactical partnership with Iran.
The Syrian president says Israel is driving the Middle East toward a new war. Bashar al-Assad says Israel is not seeking peace. He's made the comments during a meeting with Spanish Foreign Minister Miguel Angel Moratinos. Meanwhile, Syrian Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim said Israel is planting the seeds of war by threatening to attack Iran, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip. He advised Israel not to wage a new war and warned that any possible war would reach the Israeli cities.
This first Iranian attempt to destroy Israel will end with Israel taking over these bordering nations and reestablishing her borders to something closely resembling that of which God has established. This first round, or initial attempt, will see the first use of nuclear weapons since World War II, and likely the use of biological and chemical weapons. When this first attempt fails, Iran will regroup, and this time they and Russia will form a huge coalition and directly move against Israel in a military operation known biblically as the War of Gog and Magog. Israel's conquest over the inner circle of surrounding Arab populations of Palestinians, Syrians, Saudis, Egyptians, Lebanese, and Jordanians will see Israel's borders enlarged, prosperity increased, and the national stature remarkably enhanced.
No longer will the people of Israel have malicious neighbors who are painful briars and sharp thorns. Then they will know that I am the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says: when I gather the people of Israel from the nations where they have been scattered, I will show myself holy among them in the sight of the nations. Then they will live in their own land, which I gave to my servant Jacob. They will live there in safety, and will build houses and plant vineyards. They will live in safety when I inflict punishment on all their neighbors who maligned them. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God.
Simply paraphrased, yes, they will dwell securely when I, God, execute judgments on all those Arab nations around them who despise them. The Bible tells us that the national security that Israel so desperately seeks today occurs via the judgments executed on all those around them who despise them. Surprisingly, all those Arab nations around them who despise them are conspicuously absent from the War of Gog and Magog, which is a Russian-Iranian-led coalition that includes Ethiopia, Libya, and Turkey, along with several other nations. Prophecy buffs have long wondered why this would be the case, since presently all those around them who despise them are some of the most vehement enemies of Israel. Coincidentally, the Arab nations in question are members of a distinctly separate and shortly fulfilled prophecy in the form of a petition to God found in Psalm 83.